Ellie Johnson faced humiliation when nobody believed her about her mother's true role in the Special Forces. Detective Hayes, convinced that a child couldn't possibly know such secrets, mocked and doubted her at every turn, fueling outrage with his dismissive attitude. Yet fate gave Ellie the strength and evidence to upend his certainty, and her quiet courage changed everything. Listen closely to how this dramatic confrontation unfolded, and see why justice, in the end, won out so brilliantly. Ellie Johnson perched on the edge of a molded chair in Riverton Police Department, trying to steady her breathing as she waited. The room echoed with the distant chatter of officers and soft clatter of keyboards, but in that moment, everything felt strangely quiet and watchful. The walls were lined with framed commendations and faded notices, their authority seeming to press down on Ellie's small frame. Detective Richard Hayes entered the room, his presence filling the space. He was a tall man with a weathered jacket, a narrow face cut through with lines of experience, and a reputation for catching small lies before they became big problems. He settled behind his desk, glancing at Ellie, and then at the thin file in front of him. "So you're Ellie Johnson," he said, voice measured. "Your principal said you've been telling some, let's say, unusual stories at school." His tone carried the familiar mixture of amusement and doubt reserved for children with vivid imaginations. Ellie's fingers twisted nervously at the hem of her sweater, but her gaze remained focused. "I just told the truth," she answered, barely above a whisper. "My mom's in the Special Forces." Something flickered in Hayes's eyes, surprise, then skepticism. A slight, almost imperceptible smile tugged at his lips, as if he'd seen 1,000 children claim impossible things. "Special Forces, huh?" he repeated, tapping a finger on the desk. "People around here think your mom works in an office, paperwork and files and morning traffic, not what you're describing." Ellie thought of the dinners where her mother appeared later than usual. Hands rough, voice even and careful, never explaining where she'd been, or why her phone buzzed with a code nobody else seemed to understand. Hayes continued, "It's admirable being proud of your family, but you know there are rules in our line of work. Real evidence, real credentials." He leaned forward, as if about to offer a rare truth. "You ever see movies with superheroes? Sometimes kids want their parents to be just like those characters, brave, invincible." Ellie shook her head, refusing to look away. "My mom is brave, not a superhero, but she's real." For a moment, Hayes let silence fill the room. The fluorescent lights traced shadows over his face. In the corner, Officer Murphy A. Rookie, still in the first months on the job, watched with quiet interest, notebook at the ready, but saying nothing. Even he seemed a little unsure about how the detective was handling the meeting. Hayes adopted a lighter tone. "Okay, Ellie, let's walk through this. A lot of people make things up, sometimes for attention, sometimes out of fear. If your mom's really in the Special Forces, she'd have documents, awards, something to show for it. Think you can bring me something concrete?" Ellie nodded, setting her jaw. The spark of defiance quietly ignited in her chest. "I can." But Hayes wasn't finished. He stood up and paced around the room, giving her a sideways glance. "You know, it's not easy. Even if someone wanted to, most adults couldn't just walk into a place like this and say they were part of something special. It takes years of trust, training. Not much room for secrets, especially in a town where everybody knows everybody." Ellie listened, her own memories rising, a locked attic trunk, her mother's medals she'd once been allowed to hold for just a minute, the faded photographs tucked into that trunk, and the promise that not all heroes looked the part. Hayes stopped in front of the window, staring out into the parking lot. "People here talk," he sighed. "If you think your mom is hiding something, you'd better be ready to prove it. Otherwise, people might just see you as another kid with a wild story." He softened his tone. "We check every tip, nothing personal." A moment passed, and Ellie considered every word. The sting of being doubted crept over her, a flush of humiliation flooding her cheeks. Yet, she drew in a deep breath, listening to the distant buzz of police work and feeling the quiet strength her mother always showed at the kitchen table after difficult days. Detective Hayes returned to his desk, a touch of impatience showing in the tap of his fingertips. You'll have until tomorrow, Ellie. If you bring what you claim, we'll talk again. Ellie gathered her backpack, offering a polite nod as she stood. The hallway outside felt longer than before. She walked past a row of officers, their attention quickly drifting back to files and screens. Beneath the weight of their unspoken doubts, she found a new steadiness, an echo of the courage her mother brought home after each unseen battle. As Ellie left the building, the quiet laughter of Hayes floated behind her, but she paid it no mind. For the first time, she felt ready for the challenge. Whatever lay ahead, Ellie was determined. Tomorrow she would show them who her mother really was. That night, Ellie barely slept. The house was filled with the familiar scent of lavender from her mother's favorite candle. But for her, the comforting smells only highlighted the unease swirling inside her. She sat by her bedroom window, watching the streetlights flicker, knees pulled to her chest, replaying every word Detective Hayes had said. Doubt gnawed at her. Questions rattled in her mind. Why did nobody ever believe her? Was it so impossible for a kid's mom to be a hero? Downstairs, her mother, Catherine Johnson, worked quietly at the kitchen table, filling out what looked like ordinary government forms. She glanced up when Ellie came down, concern etching her features. "You should be resting," she said softly. Ellie hesitated, then took a seat across from her. "They didn't believe me. Not one bit." Her voice cracked, and the frustration finally spilled over. "They think I'm making it all up. That you're just ordinary." Catherine's eyes softened, and she reached a steady hand across the table. "Sometimes being extraordinary means people don't want to believe you. The world can't always see what's real." Her voice was low, but there was a quiet steadiness in it, a strength Ellie had always felt, even if she didn't always understand it. "But what if they never believe me?" Ellie whispered. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "You and I know the truth. We carry it with us. When the moment comes, the truth stands on its own." Much later, Ellie rummaged through the attic, searching for proof. Dust swirled in the narrow beam from her flashlight as she looked through boxes old yearbooks, photos from family vacations, and then a plain, battered trunk. Inside, beneath a careful fold of uniforms, she found medals, faded commendation letters, and a crisp certificate with her mother's full name and row of official signatures. Each item was a piece of the story only she knew. With trembling hands she gathered them, realizing for the first time how hard her mother had worked to balance these two worlds. The next day dawned gray and heavy. At school, Ellie avoided the curious glances of classmates who'd overheard the rumors. Whispers circled, some mocking, some genuinely curious, but none of them really knew Ellie or the quiet pride she nursed beneath her shy demeanor. History class seemed to stretch for hours. She barely registered the lesson. Her mind was fixed on the appointment that awaited her after school. After the final bell, she hurried across town, clutching her backpack tightly, heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. Detective Hayes greeted her at the police station, this time with only a flicker of a smile. "You came back." His voice had lost its teasing edge. There was only business in it now. As Ellie unloaded the medals, the letters, and finally the certificate, Hayes watched, silent at first, but the skepticism in his eyes slowly gave way to something closer to curiosity. He examined the medals, traced the letters with careful fingers, studying the government letterhead, the official seals barely visible at the bottom of each page. "These are very official looking," he admitted, glancing up. "How did you get all these?" Ellie hesitated, remembering her mother's words about trust and secrecy. "They're hers," she said softly. "She keeps them safe. She always told me they were important, but not to show them off unless it was really necessary." Detective Hayes leaned back, his expression unreadable. For a long while he said nothing, the silence thick as he weighed the evidence. The room felt smaller than ever, full of the unspoken histories that crowded in on them both. Finally, his tone softened. "I'll look into this. You have my word." When Ellie left the station, her head swam with conflicting feelings. Relief that someone had finally listened, anxiety over what would come next, and a new understanding of just how heavy and important the truth could be. That evening, she found her mother in the backyard, tending the small garden she maintained between long stretches at work. She slipped into her mother's arms, and for a moment neither said anything. The strength she'd always admired was there, quiet as always, proof Ellie could carry with her no matter what anyone else believed. Ellie's day unfolded with tension that she felt in every muscle as she moved through school, her head full of yesterday's promises and uncertainties. By the time the final bell rang, the world outside seemed to lean in closer, whispering possibilities she could hardly grasp. Whispers followed her in the hallways, some doubting, some already shifting toward respect, but she kept her feelings guarded, determined not to let nerves rule her actions. At home, Katherine Johnson was the picture of calm. She rose early, her every action purposeful, from making breakfast to straightening the mail on the counter. To everyone but Ellie, she looked like any other mom preparing for a day. But Ellie knew that behind the quiet routine lived stories of missions carried out far away, decisions made under pressure, and victories that would never be publicly celebrated. The afternoon stretched on, dense with anticipation. Ellie wondered if Detective Hayes might contact her again, or if everything she had brought him would be simply dismissed and forgotten. The thought made her stomach flip. Yet underneath the anxiety, something like hope burned, small but steady. Midway through math class, the door opened with a soft click. The principal entered, scanned the room, and spoke quietly to the teacher. Ellie saw her name written in the principal's glance, knew before being called that something extraordinary was about to happen. As she followed the principal down the hallway, her mind replayed every uncertain moment, the gathering of medals, the hesitant explanations, the quiet strength she'd drawn from her mother's advice. Detective Hayes was waiting in the office, his face tired but his posture softer than before. There were no papers between them this time, just an air of honest conversation. He gestured for Ellie to sit across from him. "I've spent a lot of time reviewing what you brought yesterday," Hayes began, his voice resonating with exhaustion and respect. "I also spoke extensively with your mother by video call. She told me stories I'll remember for the rest of my career." Ellie sat quietly, unsure how to respond, watching the detective carefully. He continued, "Your mother's work, most of it is classified. That's why we never saw the medals at school events or the certificates at city award banquets. She's done things for her country most people will never understand. You're lucky to have her." He paused, leaning forward with sincerity. "But you showed even greater courage, Ellie. You were willing to speak when nobody else would listen. You pushed back against doubt and didn't let anyone tell you what you should believe. That's rare." Outside, the sounds of recess drifted through the open window, a reminder of the ordinary lives moving on, while inside these walls, everything had subtly shifted. Hayes's words seemed to lift a heavy curtain that had covered Ellie's hopes for so long. She wanted to ask him questions, but found instead that she only needed to listen. The detective leaned back. "We have strict rules here about believing people and checking facts. I'm proud of how you handled yourself. I needed to see some proof, and you brought more than I expected." Ellie nodded, feeling a wave of relief and gratitude. "My mother always said the truth speaks for itself." Hayes smiled, his stern features gentle for the first time. "She's right, and sometimes the hardest thing isn't showing the proof. It's staying strong when your truth is challenged. I've seen a lot of cases, Ellie, but few people with your level of determination." He stood and offered Ellie a formal handshake, the kind reserved for those who had earned his respect after a difficult trial. For Ellie, this moment was more than just an apology. It was recognition, a validation that her quiet strength was as meaningful as any medal in the attic. Afterwards, walking home, Ellie felt the world around her sharp and clear. The sidewalk glowed in the late afternoon sun. Each step carried the weight of days spent doubting and the new lightness of a truth affirmed by another's acknowledgment. At home, she found her mother tending the garden. Catherine noticed the change in her daughter's posture immediately. Without words, she placed an arm around Ellie, and together they watched the breeze play through the leaves. As evening drew in, Ellie spoke quietly. "He apologized. He said you were one of the bravest people he'd ever met." Her mother smiled, both proud and humble. "I had to fight many battles, and some of them weren't on the front lines. The most important ones were for you." Ellie's eyes reflected gratitude and newfound confidence. "I'm glad you're my mom." They sat together until the sky darkened, sharing the silent legacy of those who proved themselves not through easy victory, but through the quiet endurance and the courage never to abandon the truth. Later, alone in her room, Ellie traced the lines of her mother's medals, finally understanding what it meant to carry the weight of courage. She closed her eyes, now certain of one thing. Sometimes real heroes wore ordinary faces, lived quiet lives, and passed their strength on to those who faced the world and refused, ever, to give up. The day after Detective Hayes' acknowledgment, Ellie woke with a sense of transformation that resonated in the very air she breathed. She moved through her morning ritual with careful intention, acutely aware of how much her world had shifted. Each step, from brushing her hair to layering her schoolbooks in her backpack, carried a weight of confidence she hadn't known before. Her mother watched her in the kitchen, preparing pancakes in sunlight that filtered across the table. Katherine Johnson's hands moved deftly, her posture relaxed but alert, a quiet echo of the discipline shaped by years of service. She caught Ellie's gaze and smiled, understanding all the words they didn't need to say. At school, Ellie entered the bustling hallway with a different kind of poise. The same students who once sent sideways glances or muffled snickers now seemed uncertain, some offering nods, some stealing quick glimpses as she passed. The story of her mother's heroism had spread quietly overnight, not as rumor, but as truth confirmed by the stern detective who had initially cast it in doubt. During lunch, Ellie sat by the window, watching clouds drift across a gentle blue sky. Two classmates approached, voices tentative, curiosity blending with a new respect. "Is it true?" one boy ventured. "Your mom." "All that stuff Detective Hayes said." Ellie nodded, not with bravado, but with the quiet composure earned through struggle. Another girl murmured, "I wish my mom was brave like that." Ellie shrugged with a soft smile. "She probably is, just in ways people don't see." Her teachers treated her differently, too. Remarks were softer, questions less pointed. The principal paused to ask if she was feeling okay, reminding her that the school was proud to have students with families who served the country in such important ways. Yet for Ellie, the greatest change lay not in others' behavior, but within herself. Gone was the familiar tangle of doubt and self-consciousness that had haunted her for weeks. In its place grew an unshakable sense of belonging, of knowing she could meet challenges with the same resolve her mother had always shown. As classes ended and the bitter October breeze blew through the playground, Ellie saw Detective Hayes waiting near the gate. His expression was humble, his figure standing apart from the cheerful chaos of students heading home. When she reached him, he began with no pretense, just quiet sincerity. "I came to apologize properly, Ellie," he said, holding out a small, official-looking envelope. "You've taught me a valuable lesson, not to underestimate anyone, no matter how young. Your mother. She earned every bit of respect, and so have you." Ellie took the envelope, realizing it contained a formal letter of recognition for her mother, signed by civic leaders, a rare gesture in their small town. Hayes continued, voice steadier. "Sometimes we forget that people around us are capable of incredible things. Thank you for reminding me." As he left, Ellie felt the final stone of skepticism fall away. The wordless support of her community, the reinforced respect for her mother, and the detective's genuine reversal left Ellie anchored in new certainty. The doubt from days before was just a shadow behind her now. At home, Catherine read the letter with tears brightening her eyes. She drew Ellie close, her embrace saying more than words ever could. Together they stood in the late sunlight, mother and daughter united not just by blood, but by shared endurance, trust, and newfound recognition. That evening, Ellie wrote in her journal, her thoughts unraveling into careful words. "Strength isn't always easy. Sometimes you have to fight for people to see it. But when they do, the world feels bigger, brighter. I finally feel proud not just of my mom, but of myself." Months passed, but the impact of those days etched itself into Ellie's story. Her resolve, her sense of self-worth, and her deep appreciation for quiet heroism. She became the girl whose mother inspired the whole school. But more importantly, she became someone who believed in her own strength. Every step she took after that, through challenges, joys, and the inevitable changes of growing up, was grounded in this experience. In moments of doubt, she remembered overcoming the disbelief, remembered the gentle wisdom in her mother's words, and found herself ready to face whatever came next. The town, too, had changed. Where before there was skepticism, now there was pride. Ellie's story became one of the whispered legends among students about how one determined girl, when pressed to defend the truth, revealed not only what her mother had done, but who she herself had become. And in the quiet at the end of each day, Ellie cherished the subtle but lasting victory, a triumph not won in a burst of applause, but in the steady unfolding of respect, understanding, and love that lasted long after the initial struggle faded from view.